Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Simplifying Forgiveness, the new Form 3508S. I'm Yonina F. Scheinweather, the Consulting Director of Compliance at Viventium, and together we're going to be taking a look at things that have gotten easier, which is kind of nice for a change to hear that things are getting easier. Just a couple of administrative notes before we get started. First of all, I want to call all of your attention to the questions tool on your toolbar and to encourage you to use it. Those of you who have done webinars with Viventium in the past know that we try as much as possible to leave some question answer time at the end, as well as to work your questions in as we go along. So please don't be shy and go right ahead and type in any questions that you may have about anything that we're covering. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the slides will be available to our participants so that you can review the material or share it with associates. So let's get started. As you know, the CARES Act enacted the PPP loan program, and right now everyone's focused very much on forgiveness and how the process is going to work. And the original process that was introduced was called Form 3508, although many of you may not have known that it was called 3508 because nowhere on the form did it say 3508. It was just the forgiveness application. And it was quite intimidating and quite complex. It contained a Schedule A and a Schedule A worksheet. It asked for all kinds of detailed information that might have led to forgiveness reduction if you reduced your employees' wages more than 25% and weren't in any safe harbor, or if you cut your FTE or full-time equivalent count in any way, and all those things were leading to forgiveness reduction. But the process was complex. It was tedious, and it was, highly labor intensive. And so SBA and the Department of Treasury issued the 3508EZ, a simplified form. And actually, if you take a look at viventium.com, you'll see some information and some webinars there explaining the 3508EZ and who can qualify. And that was a degree of relief for many employers. And the next step in the simplifying process, which is the last step so far, is yet a new form called the 3508S, and we'll talk about who qualifies to use it and what it can do for you, which greatly streamlined and is greatly simplifying the process. So that's the basic overview of where we're going today. Let's meet the form. Here is in front of you the 3508S. The beginning looks very familiar for those of you who've been looking at the forms until now. It looks very familiar, asks your company information, some basics. And then it basically ends with half a page or maybe even a quarter of a page, the bottom line forgiveness amount, and then you're done. I mean, there's, of course, the same certifications that you need to be making. Some of the details that have been built into the face of the other forms, the longer forms, are now in the certifications. We'll talk about what has changed, what hasn't changed. But in essence, the form has become a quarter page. And here it is in front of us. So let's take a look at it. At the top, you're just putting down your address, name and address, your PPP loan number, which may be different than your bank's loan number. I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but we've seen clients experience that a lender, bank, will assign a different number that differs from the one the SBA has assigned to you. So they do need both numbers. You're going to be putting down your total loan amount, even if it was paid in a few different disbursements. And your loan disbursement date, that means the date you received your first disbursement. Okay, so if you received a few installments, you go by the earliest date. And what's noticeably missing here is the covered period, where you have to select the 8 weeks or the 24 weeks. You have to put down, the period that you're choosing. In this case, in the case of the simplified form, you are still entitled to use either 8 weeks or 24 weeks if you received your loan before the Flexibility Act, the PPPFA, which was June 5th. Those of you who received your loan monies after or applied for your loans after would be limited to use the 24 week option, but that hasn't changed. You still have the possibility, you still have the option of using either 8 or 24, even though you don't have to spell it out for them in terms of dates here on the form. And then, of course, anybody who received an economic injury disaster loan has to put down the advance. That's very similar to the regular forms, the longer forms we had seen before, and your EIDL application number. And then, lo and behold, all of the details just fly out the window, and they just ask you for one number, and that is forgiveness amount. And that means, how much are you asking for forgiveness? What's the amount that you're applying for forgiveness? Okay, so that's the form itself. And just to answer a couple of questions that have come in, do you need to be sending the form and the documentation to the lending bank or SBA? So first of all, the documentation does go to your lender, not to the SBA. They're the conduit. They're the ones who brought you your funds. They're the ones that the forgiveness application is going to be going to. And the answer is actually on the form itself, there's a list of, depending of course which form you're using, but there's a list of what needs to be sent. In other words, what backup documentation has to be submitted and what has to be just kept in your records in case of future audit. And just in terms of detail, the question was, do you need to show both the utility invoice and the payment check copy, or can you just give the copy of the payment? So this is really outside of the purview of payroll, but I will go ahead and answer that as a best practice, keep as much documentation as possible. Keep your invoices, keep your rental contracts, keep your mortgage contracts that show, don't just keep a copy of the payment. Do have your contracts available, and that's just in general. And you can go through in detail. It lists what you need to be storing and what you need to be sending, but generally it would pay to have everything. We don't know how much detail they're going to be looking for. Basically, no one has gone through a forgiveness process fully yet, and the SBA certainly hasn't started asking for documentation yet, so keep whatever you possibly can. Now, we've had a question about the eligibility for the form. Who gets to use Form 3508S? Who gets this really easy process? So the answer is, as some of you I see have noted here in the question, tab, employers who receive loans of $50,000 or less are eligible for the simplified process. However, and I see there's a little bit of confusion about this in the questions, there is something about $2 million. So where does that fit in? Are we $50,000 or are we $2 million? So let's clarify. You can use the form if your loan is $50,000 or less, unless you are part of an affiliated group using the SBA's affiliation rules, and the entire group received loans totaling $2 million or more, even if your loan was less. So let's see how this plays out in a couple of scenarios. So we have company ABC and DEF, and they belong to an affiliated group. So first scenario, ABC gets a loan of $50,000. DEF gets a loan of $50,000. They're the only two members of the affiliated group, so the total is $100,000. Both ABC and DEF can qualify. No problems here. Change the scenario a bit. ABC got 50, DEF got a loan of 60,000. So now the total to the group is still only 110,000. It's way below 2 million. So therefore ABC qualifies. However, DEF as a standalone entity does not qualify because its loan was more than $50,000. So here it's disqualified not based on the affiliated group, but just disqualified on its own merits or demerits or whatever you want to call it. What about the third scenario? Well, ABC took a loan of $50,000. DEF took $1,950,000. They're part of an affiliated group, so the total is $2 million. Neither ABC nor DEF can use the simplified process. Now, they could still use the EZ process if they qualify for that, but they may not use the simplified process, and that's even though ABC's own loan was only $50,000. And if it hadn't been part of this affiliated group, ABC would have qualified. Okay, but by virtue of being in the affiliated group, it's disqualified. Now, lest you think that the reason ABC is disqualified is because its loan is pushing the group up to 2 million, let's look at the fourth scenario. ABC took a loan, still of $50,000, where DEF took a loan of $3 million. So the affiliated group is way over 2 million even without ABC. In that scenario, can ABC use the simplified process? No, they still can't, because the rule is that if your affiliated group is more than 2 million or more, you may not use the simplified process. Doesn't matter how much your own loan was for. And of course, the EF is disqualified as well. So I hope that sheds a little bit of light on the qualifications and who is eligible to use the form. Now, question was asked, does the simplified form ask for the number of employees or the amount of payroll? So the answer is no, the form itself does not ask for it. However, the amount of payroll, as we will see, is built in to the form in terms of what they're going to ask you to be certifying and the process that they're going to be asking you to follow in order to come up with the forgiveness amount. We're going to get to that in just a little while. Okay, let us continue. So now, what has gotten simpler? Well, the form itself has certainly gotten simpler. As we saw, we don't put down the number of employees. I mean, when I say we don't put down the number of employees, let me backtrack a minute. It says employees at the time of the loan application and employees at the time of the forgiveness application. That's fine. That's not, what they're asking there is not FTEs. They're not asking you to do any detailed count like you had to on the long process. They just want, you can use your active, they don't even define active employees, people who are kept on payroll, they don't define it at all. This is not used, these two lines are not used for calculating anything to do with forgiveness. We're assuming that why are they asking for it? Probably for statistical SBA tracking purposes, kind of like the way the 941, the IRS asks you on your 941, tell us the number of employees worked in the 12th of the month, the third month of the quarter, and that's used for BLS, for employment statistics. So probably here too, SBA just wants to track, the impact of their loan, how many employees benefited, how many were still there, at the time of forgiveness, but this is not impactful on your loan amount the same way that FTEs and the process that you had to do to see if you reduced your workforce, that doesn't exist in the simplified form. It's just basically statistical data accumulation. Okay, so let's move forward again. What has gotten simpler? Well, the whole business of wage reduction, that if you reduced any employee's salary more than 25%, and you were going to get your forgiveness reduced dollar for dollar, all of that is out the window, canceled. And the same thing for FTE reduction. Even if you reduced your workforce, and even if no safe harbor would apply to you, or there was no excuse for it, it doesn't matter. You're still going to be eligible for full forgiveness, potentially. That's what was simplified. And therefore, we don't have any Schedule A, we don't have any Schedule A worksheet, and all of those detailed employee by employee calculations are no longer necessary. So an example, ABC got their PPP loan of $50,000, means they qualify for the 3508S. They had paid $100,000 during first quarter. Now, those of you who have begun to look into wage reduction know that the look back period for wage reduction is the first quarter. It's January 1 through March 31 of 2020. That's the baseline for seeing if you had a wage reduction. So let's assume they paid $100,000 in wages during that look back period. And then during its covered period, whether it was 8 weeks or 24 weeks, whatever they selected, during the covered period, they paid only $10,000 in wages and no safe harbor applied. Well, since they have a loan of $50,000, that means they qualify for the 3508S process, and they will be able to request full forgiveness on 3508S despite the wage reduction. Okay, example 2, ABC again received a PPP loan of the $50,000. Now, when it comes to FTEs, if you remember, you have a choice of look-back periods. And you can choose between one of 2, or if you're seasonal, you even have a choice of 3 look-back periods. But let's say they had 1,000 employees, 1,000 FTEs during their chosen look-back period. Well, during the covered period, either the 8 or the 24 weeks, it only had 10 employees, and there was no safe harbor. It wasn't because of people being terminated for cause or voluntarily quitting, and it wasn't because of COVID-related federal rules or guidance or OSHA or HHA or any of those, any of those safe harbors. And by the way, if anybody wants a review of the safe harbors, I would invite you to visit viventium.com, and on our webinars page, we have lots of good information about that in case you're not eligible for the simple process and you do want to find out what safe harbors are available. But in our example, let's assume that no safe harbor, they just, they cut their workforce and, the executives took all the money of the loan or something like that. Well, since their loan was only $50,000, they are still eligible to request full forgiveness. Now, we will see that it's not quite so simple. You can't just, pay everything out to your executives and expect full forgiveness. But if somebody really had a bona fide situation where their FTEs went down with no safe harbor, they'll still be eligible to request full forgiveness on the simplified process because their loan is considered de minimis. That was really the logic of SBA, that, these loans are de minimis, and therefore, we have the authority to go ahead and simplify it. But not everything was simplified. There are a number of requirements that still exist. First one is the 60% rule. Your payroll costs must still equal at least 60% of your forgiveness amount. Now that is not new. That was a requirement on the long form and on the easy form, that whatever amount you're asking forgiveness for, so at least 60% of it has to be payroll. Now people have been asking me, well, can 100% of it be payroll, or do I have to use utility, mortgage rent, and mortgage interest and rental costs? Do I have to use that if I had it, or can I just count 100% of payroll? The answer is you can certainly count 100% of payroll. You can count anything more than 60%. In other words, the rule is at least 60% of payroll. But if you want to claim your forgiveness based on 100% of payroll costs and not claim your rent, utilities, or interest, then go right ahead. There's no problem with that. As a matter of fact, I would suggest as a best practice that you do consult with your CPA, your tax advisor, keeping in mind that the IRS so far, although there's strong lobbying going on about it, but so far, the IRS is ruling that any mortgage interest, any utility costs, and any rental payments that a corporation claims forgiveness for in the PPP program cannot be used as a corporate tax deduction. You know how you usually deduct that on your corporate return, but they're saying, well, if the SBA is paying for it, if it's being forgiven, then you can't take that as a deduction on your return. Now, as I mentioned, there is a strong lobbying effort to try to get that canceled because that kind of defeats the purpose or part of the purpose of the CARES relief. But as it stands right now, that could affect your corporate, tax bottom line. And therefore, if you're able to claim 100% of payroll and still get your full forgiveness, then it might indeed be to your benefit to do so. Again, I'd refer you to your tax advisor to get more information about that. But yeah, the 60% payroll rule is still there, still exists. The second requirement that was not simplified is the limit on compensation paid to what we call owner employees. Now, that could be in an S corporation, employees more than 2% owners. It could be in an LLC, depending on how it's structured. It could be, of course, a sole proprietorship or a partnership. The compensation paid to owner employees are still limited to the same two amounts. If you're using an 8-week period, it's the lower of the $15,385. Well, that everybody was limited to $15,385. But another limit has gotten slapped on to owner employees, and that is you can't count more than 8 weeks out of your 2019 compensation paid to them. And you understand why they're doing that. What they don't want to have happening is what I mentioned before, just cutting your payroll and paying all the money out to your owners, and saying, well, I want forgiveness for it. So, it's limited to the lesser of the $15,000 and 8 weeks of what they were actually paid in 2019 before COVID happened. The 24-week limit is similarly lower of 2.5 months of the 2019 compensation, or $20,833, which is 2.5 months of the $100,000. You can't claim more for any employee of $100,000 a year. 2.5 months of that is $20,833. But if for an owner employee, we have to look back to 2019 just to make sure we're not trying to inflate their compensation and take advantage of the PPP program. So they've limited it to the lesser of those two amounts. Now, again, this is not new, and there's a lot of explanation about this available on viventium.com and some of our other resources there. But this requirement is still extant, still exists on the 3508S form. And as a matter of fact, they're going to make you certify this. So as I mentioned, some of the calculations that were spelled out on the longer forms are not spelled out here, but they are there in the certification. They make you certify that you're not requesting forgiveness for any amount. In other words, that the forgiveness amount is at least 60% payroll. And they also make you certify that the owner employees amounts do not exceed these limits. So how does Ventium help our clients, and how can we help you get through the simplified process? So I'm going to take a quick look at some of the Ventium screens here. The first step, it's really a two-step process in the simplified way, is to generate Ventium's payroll cost report. Now, the screenshot we're looking at right now is a subsection of the Ventium report library. And as you see, we have a few PPP reports for our clients. You start with the payroll cost report. That's the basic one that shows how much payroll you're actually able to count. And that report limits you at 15,385 or the 46, that whatever the limits are, depending on how many weeks your covered period. That knows not to count FFCRA payments. Those FCRA leave payments are not counted toward forgivable payroll. It knows to limit employee owners. You're putting in Social Security's of the numbers of the employee owners on the payroll, and it applies the appropriate limits. So the payroll cost report is the starter where you get to see how much payroll you actually pay during your covered period to base your forgiveness request on. Now, if you were doing the longer processes, you would also need to run the Ventium wage reduction report, which, as its name says, shows you how much dollar for dollar wage reduction you're going to have. And of course, there's some safe harbors built in there, and you can run the report using various payroll comparison dates. As you know, if a safe harbor applies, but you restore the wage reductions by a certain date, then you can be excused from the forgiveness reduction. So this report helps you do that, which is not really relevant today because that's not part of the simplified process. And Ventium also provides an FTE reduction report, which goes employee by employee and counts their hours and gives you your FTE counts and shows you, the potential safe harbors that you're eligible for. But for our process, for the simplified today, we're just going to be selecting the payroll cost report. That's where it all starts. And you get a report that looks something like this. This is the last page of the report. So just sample data. It gives you the employees' names, their socials, the gross pay, that's during the covered period, of course, any FFCRA excluded earnings, because the FFCRA is not eligible for forgiveness. That would be double dipping, right? Because you're anyway getting a credit back from the IRS on what you paid for FCRA. And then, of course, any gross pay in excess of $100,000 or $100,000 equivalent, depending on whether you're 8 weeks or 24 weeks. And then we get to a column called SBA cash compensation. That's a catchword on the forgiveness forms. How much was the cash compensation? And then, of course, you get to include any employer, state, and local taxes paid, any employer health benefits paid on behalf of employees, and any employer contributions to employee retirement plans. And the total on that report is called the grand total, which is what flows through, of course, to the long form, the long application. And that's really the starting point of the SBA forgiveness, of the simplified forgiveness process. Now, the continuing point of that process is to take the grand total. This is step 2. Take the grand total from the payroll cost report. Let's say your grand total, I'm just making up a number, it was $21,331. It had to be below 50, probably below 50,000 if you were getting a small loan. So let's take a random number, but let us assume you ran the Ventium cost report, and this was the number of the grand total cash compensation plus the employer state taxes, local taxes, contributions to health insurance, and contributions to retirement plans. To that, you're supposed to add your other qualified expenses, any mortgage interest or rent or utilities that you're choosing to count toward forgiveness. Again, that would be a choice that you'd be making. By the way, utilities has been found to include internet costs, communication costs. And so the total eligible cost in our example, let's say, is $36,331. Is that the number that you're supposed to put down on the form? The answer is no. The first limit is the loan amount. You can't claim forgiveness for more than your loan amount. So let's say my payroll had been not $21,000, but $210,000. So the total eligible cost would have been $210,000, but still, since my loan was only $50,000, they're not going to forgive more than they actually paid me. So that's the first limit on the forgiveness. And then the second limit is the 60% rule. You must take your grand total from Viventium's payroll cost report, or whatever you figure your payroll cost to be. You have to take your payroll cost and divide it. This part is tricky. People think multiply. It's not multiply. It's divide it by 0.60% to gross up to a maximum. The gross up a number is 35,552. That means you cannot request forgiveness for more than 35,552, because if you did, it would be less than 60% payroll cost. Again, you see what we're doing? We're taking the payroll cost, we're grossing it up by dividing by 60%, 0.60, and that gives us the maximum that we could possibly be requesting forgiveness for. And then the smallest of the last three lines is what you put on the forgiveness amount application. So they're not spelling it out for you. On the longer forms, they did spell it out for you. Here, they're just making you certified that you went through this process. Now, if you're doing this on your own, you can do it in Excel. Viventium actually has streamlined even that part for our clients. This is the Viventium way. You just run something called the 3508S report, and this is what it looks like. And that does all of the above automatically. It tells you your grand total from the payroll cost report, any other qualified expenses that your company may have had. That's a parameter you'd be putting in, obviously, because the Viventium can't know that. That gives you your total eligible costs. These are the numbers we just looked at. It also will tell you, okay, here's your loan amount, here's your 60% rule, and the smallest of the previous three lines is the forgiveness amount. That is what flows through to your simplified application. And to wind down, let's just work through a comprehensive example. So, illustrating everything we've spoken about, ABC Inc. is part of an affiliated group of restaurants, and it got a loan of $40,000. Most of the other group members did not take PPP loans. Matter of fact, only one took a loan for $1,500,000. So we pause for a moment. $1,500,000 plus $40,000. Nope, did not exceed $2 million. So that means, of course, that one particular member that took the $1.5 million is not going to be eligible for simplification, but ABC will be, because ABC's group did not take more than $2 million, and ABC itself was only $40,000. So great. ABC is going to be eligible for the simplified process. Now, since it was a restaurant, ABC was closed for business since the beginning of COVID-19, and it only managed to pay its employees 1/4 of their pre-COVID salaries. That would put it into a wage reduction scenario. So the grand total on its payroll cost report is only $10,000. However, it had some additional expenses. It had mortgage interest of $30,000 on its location, rent, and utilities. Interesting how they had mortgage interest and rent, but they managed to do that. Perhaps they had two different locations, whatever the case may be. They have documentation for this $9,000 in cost. What will ABC be able to do? Well, first of all, they will be able to use the 3508S, and they'll apply for forgiveness for the smallest of the following. $19,000, what's that? That's the payroll plus the other expenses. Grand total from the report plus the other eligible expenses. Or the smallest of that, or $40,000, because they can't apply for forgiveness for more than the amount of their loan. And they also need to be applying their 60% rule. So if they take their $10,000 from the payroll cost report divided by 0.60, they only get up to $16,666. So unfortunately, they are not able to apply for the full $19,000 in forgiveness. The forgiveness amount that ABC must put on its 3508S is $16,666. Now, I want to stress that this result would be the same even if ABC had used the long process and the long form, except that they may have had an even worse result. In other words, they could not have gotten more than $16,666. They might, though, have suffered even a worse fate because it looks like they had some kind of a bad wage reduction here, and they probably had FTE reductions as well. Okay, the FTE reductions they may have been able to get out of because of, the safe harbor, that they were a restaurant, and they were closed probably because of some OSHA requirement or whatever it was. But but they would probably still be subject to wage reduction potentially. So they only you only stand to gain by using the 3508S. I know people ask, which should we use if we're eligible for the S? Definitely is a best practice. If you're eligible for the S, go ahead and use it. You won't lose from it. You might come out with the same result, but you'll gain time, you'll gain labor intensive effort, you'll just gain, and you're not going to come out with a worse result than you would had you done the long process. And so we are out of time for today. I want to thank you all for your participation, especially the active participation of those of you who submitted questions. And you have some contact information here if you'd like to follow up with Viventium, and especially encourage you to check out our COVID-19 solutions page for some really great resources, links, and information. And I look forward to meeting you in future webinars and wishing you all lots of success in obtaining full forgiveness for your PPP loans. Thanks a lot and have a great day.